Fallout Equestria: The Chrysalis, Chapter 11, Part 3. The rest of the trip was uneventful, save for when the whirligig flew past us in the opposite direction later that evening. By the next afternoon, we could see the angular shapes of ancient buildings onto the horizon. Those slowly drew closer throughout the rest of the day, giant skeletons of century-dead buildings stretching up into the grimy sky. I found it particularly depressing and remarkably eerie. Starlight told me that it had been hit by a balefire bomb at the end of the war, but I was struck by how many buildings still stood. The balefire had left a gigantic crater on the other side of the city, she said, but it seemed that the necromantic fire that had swept through the city had simply just burned all the life from the place, rather than just leveling everything. Hundreds of thousands of ponies had likely died there, while those towers loomed over it all like giant tombstones. The town of Mareford was set along the very southern edge of those ruins, where the devastation was, well, less severe. And I must say, if I hadn't been so familiar with the height of Equestria prior to its fall, Mareford would have been quite impressive. The place was big, covering quite a bit more ground than even Paradise Beach had. A tall wall ringed around the town, mostly built between existing buildings, with various towers and walkways along its length. Almost all of the buildings that had once been set outside those walls had been torn down, leaving nothing more than scattered foundations. The few exceptions were the occasional farm building set alongside the sparse fields. The agriculture development was meager, even compared to Appaloosa, but I found myself happy to see it. I mean, it was progress. The farmers tending those thin fields paid us no mind as we walked along what had, at some point, turned into a proper dirt road. Militia guards manned the wall and outlook towers, and I saw at least one heavy weapon partially concealed within the upper levels of an old ruined apartment building. To my surprise, several motor wagons were waiting just outside the gates, under those guards' watchful eyes. All of them bore the signs of the wasteland, with rusted armor plates welded onto their frames to turn what had originally been open-top vehicles into something well-protected and enclosed. The two smaller wagons each had a roof-mounted machine gun, crewed by ponies poking up from the roof. The much larger, heavy cargo motor wagon had similar weapons at each end, and at least half a dozen individuals, including a pair of griffins, mounted atop it, all carrying personal weapons. There was a fourth vehicle that I really didn't know how to classify it. It looked like some pony had simply taken a particularly big motor wagon motor and affixed a large wheel at either end. It was long and narrow and made the cloth-wrapped and goggle-wearing pony straddled to the contraption looking small in comparison. I was later told that it was a motorcycle, at some sort of bizarre portmanteau of motor wagon and bicycle. Personally, it seemed immensely impractical, potentially suicidal, and likely very fast. A few of the caravan guards eyed our approach. One of the ponies in the smaller wagon swung his machine gun over in our direction, though the barrel remained pointing up into the air. Given the excessive amounts of firepower at their disposal and the Mareford guards nearby, they didn't really have much to worry about. "That's the Trotston convoy," Dusty said, tipping his head their way. "Don't worry about the guns. They're very protective of their wagons, but they've always been pretty decent types." He followed it up by giving a casual wave, and a few of the caravan guards returned the gesture. Even the one who had his turned gun towards us looked pretty relaxed, leaning back against the rim of the roof opening. At the gate, Dusty exchanged pleasantries with another armed pony who recognized him. The other guards relaxed as the two greeted each other, and after a quick chat, we were on our way past the multi-story tall gates and into Mareford. Stepping through the gates, I got my first good view of the town itself. A paved road formed onto the main thoroughfare, surrounded by multi-story buildings. While most of the buildings were from before the megaspells, many appeared to be newer. Additionally, while it was apparent that the buildings had been built or patched with salvage materials, it looked like there had been some very skilled ponies working on them, ponies who knew how to make something good, rather than something that was simply good enough. It wasn't quite as upbeat and colorful as Gemstone, but it was clean and well-maintained, and it felt like a pony town, even if that feeling was somewhat, faint. There was still all the problems of the wasteland out there, past the walls and out of sight of the well-equipped guards. Inside the walls, however, were hundreds of colorful ponies living in relative comfort. Many were working or moving supplies around, some were stopping by modestly stocked shops to trade, and a few stopped in the streets to chat. It was pleasant, and it almost brought a smile to my face. Though, I say almost, because of the suspicion that something dark lingered behind it all. It's something I was quite familiar with, well, before stepping out into the wasteland anyway. While most of the ponies in the old Equestria were nice, friendly, loving sorts, infiltrators became intimately familiar with the few unpleasant ponies that lurked in the background, the ponies who fed onto the war and strife for their own good. They were rare, but they were still there. I imagine the wasteland is the sort of place where that kind of pony can thrive. Silverline took the lead, guiding us down the road and past the various ponies moving about. The road was busy with ponies wearing packs and hauling carts, loading and unloading goods from the caravan sitting outside of the gate. Most paid us no mind. A few curious looks came from ponies tending the occasional shop or just passing by, though they were more focused on Sickle than Silverline and Quicksilver. We soon turned off the main road, leaving the busy line of ponies behind. Our hooves clopped sharply onto the paved street, crisscrossed with patched cracks from the years of wear. Instead of the shops and businesses that lined the main street, we passed buildings that had been converted to apartments, and even the occasional house. A few ponies were still out and about, though more relaxed than those that had been hauling goods. There was even a small field where several younger ponies kicked around a ball that looked to have been patched so much that I couldn't tell if there was any original matter still present into it. Finally, Silverline came to a halt before a group of single-story houses. She stared at one for a few moments before looking back to Dusty.
This is my place. You can stay here if you'd like.
Probably a bit crowded with all of us, Dusty said, smiling. We'll just sit in an inn. I'll leave you two alone with your privacy. Thank you for the offer, though.
Oh, I guess.
Is Cinderblock's Inn still running? Silverline blinked, then looked off and thought for a moment.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
Oh, good, Dusty said, nodding. I always liked him. We'll probably get a room there. If you need to get a hold of us, well, you know where we are. She nodded, blinking a few times before speaking up again.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Dusty casually shrugged. Glad to help. Goodbyes were brief, and soon the pair were walking off towards the steps of their home. We stood back, watching them go. It felt good. Just having been able to help them, and not good enough to make up for what had happened to them, but there was a sense of satisfaction that we made a difference, no matter how small that it might have been. And then Sickle spoke up with her deep, rumbling voice.
The mom'll do fine. The kid's fucked though.
Dusty groaned. Way to spoil the mood, he grumbled as he turned away, walking back the way we came. Starlight leveled a glare at her.
What the hell, Sickle? Seriously? What?
Sickle shot back, looking down at her.
I've seen plenty of ponies get raped and shit. I know how it goes. They either harden the fuck up and deal with it, or they learn to be good little victims the rest of their lives. Pretty clear which is which, and whining about it ain't gonna change shit.
Starlight continued to glare at Sickle, turning around to follow Dusty.
And what about you, huh?
Starlight asked.
You ever rape a pony? Well, no,
Sickle said, without even looking back.
I was one of those nice raiders that never hurt any pony.
Starlight stayed put, eyes narrowed to slits as she watched Sickle walking away. She remained perfectly still and silent until I stepped up beside her, at which point she hissed between her clenched teeth.
It's so damn tempting to just shoot her and be done with it.
I lifted a hoof, placing it gently onto her shoulder, and tension fled her. She turned her head, looking to me. I really couldn't think of anything useful to say. Instead, I just gave a faint, lopsided smile.
Not in town.
She snorted out a weak laugh, then sighed, and then we both set out to catch up with Dusty. Cinderblock's Inn was a big place, larger than Mustard's, and occupying a properly built, reinforced concrete building rather than a crudely welded metal structure. The first floor served as a bar, and it was quite clear that it was a reasonably popular place, with close to 20 ponies enjoying drinks and meals. It looked like the place had been a bar before the war, and while the colors had faded from the walls, their current owner had done a pretty good job keeping the place clean and in good repair. The air was full of talk and happiness, set to the backdrop of a static-laced and vaguely familiar tune played by an old radio at the bar. Dusty arranged a room for us, a large one intended for traders and other traveling groups. We made our way up, claiming our cots and unloading our supplies. Then, we were heading out again. The town hall and mayoral mansion were the same building, a prestigious-looking 3-story building set behind a small paved courtyard. Once we stepped into the main lobby, a young buck behind the desk looked up to us. The reflexive smile faltered as he saw Sickle, but he recovered quickly.
Welcome to Town Hall. Is there something I could help you with?
Yes, Dusty said as he approached the desk. Is Big Gun here?
He's in the office. Should I let him know that you would like to speak with him?
No need, Dusty said, smiling as he passed the desk. I'll tell him myself. The young pony's smile slipped away as we walked right past him.
Wait, but you can't,
His half-formed protest ended as Sickle passed close to him, her metal-clad head turning to keep her gaze locked straight onto him. He backed up, almost tripping onto his chair. Dusty knew exactly where he was going. He led us up the stairs at the back of the lobby, turned and walked up to a set of unmarked double doors. He threw them open, to the surprise of the small group of ponies beyond. He leveled a glare at one of them as he entered. What the hell is going on, Gun? The unicorn seated onto a couch nearby had a hard look as he turned, shifting his balance forward as if preparing to rise and fight. Fortunately, the pistol holstered at his side remained in place. Standing beside a huge desk, a teal mare watched us enter, a smirk spreading across her face. She was also a unicorn, if a good deal older than the tan stallion, though her wiry frame looked just as fit. The pony Dusty had addressed sat behind the desk, his face lit by the screen of a terminal. He was the oldest of the lot, probably in his 50s, and the one Earth pony in the room before our intrusion. He frowned across the desk at us. Mr. Trails, isn't it? Would you mind telling me why you're leading a group of armed mercenaries into my office? Because I want some answers, Dusty replied, storming up right to the end of the desk to glower at the older pony. Like, why you hired a bunch of worthless mercenaries to guard the water caravan, mercenaries that left them high and dry when the raiders showed up. Big Gun stared at him for several seconds before standing. The terminal's glow winked out as he pressed a button, and he followed up by gesturing the same hoof at the stallion seated onto the nearby couch. Mr. Trails, I would like to introduce you to Fireline, leader of those worthless mercenaries, as you call them. He and I were just discussing how to uncover exactly what happened before you barged in and interrupted us. Dusty didn't even look at the other pony. I already know what happened, Gun. You hired a bunch of mercs instead of using the militia, and some pony got them to abandon those ponies right after telling a bunch of raiders when and where to hit them. So I've heard, Gun replied coolly. Though the rangers sent to investigate weren't able to find anything conclusive. Fireline has expressed his confidence that the squad he assigned to the caravan should have held off even a large raider band, had they still been present. Isn't that correct? The unicorn stallion nodded, his expression wary as he watched us. Yeah, 6 experienced soldiers, well rested after a stay in town, and equipped with the best arms and armor available. They should have been able to hold off any raider gang, if not, inflict a crippling number of casualties upon them. It does suggest that they weren't really present at all. We already know that they weren't present, Dusty snapped, then looked to Gun again. And why are you hiring a bunch of outsiders instead of using the militia? You know, the ponies whose job it is to protect those ponies? Because the militia is stretched too thin protecting the settlements under our care. Perhaps, if a significant number of their ranks hadn't taken after certain unreliable ponies and abandoned their pledge, we could have had afforded the soldiers to keep the caravan safe. But the militia simply doesn't have the ponies to be everywhere at once. Dusty bristled, pointing a hoof at him. Don't you even try to lay that shit on me, Gun. When you come in here, accusing me of failing the very ponies you walked out on? Big Gun scoffed, raising his nose. These were my assets those raiders destroyed, my caps that were lost, my ponies that were killed. I know you have a low opinion of me, Mr. Trails, but even you know I don't throw away resources or ponies. No, Dusty said, eyes narrowed. You just spend them like caps. The mare standing beside Big Gun's desk, who had been silent this whole time, stepped forward. She had a cruel grin that reminded me of Sickle's, though it wasn't really nearly as effective in comparison.
You better watch what you say, lest you want to try saying it with no fucking teeth.
Now, Wild, Big Gun said. No need of that. As he was speaking, the sound of hooves drew out our attention back to the entrance of the room, just as 4 militia soldiers entered. While their weapons were slung in easy reach across their chests, they were looking more curious and wary than aggressive. After all, I believe Mr. Trails and his friends were just leaving, Big Gun said, his eyes still locked onto Dusty's as he smiled. He spoke a little louder as he addressed the soldiers. Sorry to disturb you, fine ponies, but it seems we've concluded our business. Would you kindly see Mr. Trails and his companions out? Dusty continued to glare for several seconds before snorting and turning away to stomp towards the door. Oh, and Mr. Trails. Dusty stopped, glaring over his shoulder. Big Gun's smile had vanished, returning to a more serious look. You intend to continue pursuing this matter, I presume? Yeah, Gun. I'm gonna find whoever it was that set those raiders on a bunch of innocent ponies. Gun considered him a moment longer before nodding. Then wait in the lobby, and I might be able to help with that. If you're going to stick your hoof in the pot, I may as well make sure that it helps us. Dusty continued to glare for another second before giving a sharp nod and walking out. We followed after him.